sit back, make yourself comfortable. And before we begin, let us first talk about the book we're going to be reading today. Today's book is an interesting one. Originally, I was going to read a Warhammer book, but yeah, I have a feeling I'd get in trouble for that. So instead, we're going to read something a little bit different. Today, we are going to be reading a book from my personal collection. I got this book back when I was in high school on a whim. We're going to be reading the book. Well, I'm going to show you the title. We're going to be reading the book, or part of it anyway. We're going to be reading the book, My Tank is Fight, Deranged Inventions of World War II, by Zach Parsons. This is, well, as I've said, I'm a history guy, and this is a crazy little book, okay? There's a lot of crazy stuff that World War II cooked up, and we're going to go over some of them today. So let me just scoot this down so you know what we're reading. Going to put this right over here. And what I'm also going to do is every time we read the book or read the chapter about a certain weapon or piece of equipment, I will have that on screen, and we will also talk about it afterwards. So give me a minute. Let me get our first one here. So first up, I'm not going to read the foreword of the by Zach Parsons. No need for that. But sit back, relax, and let's get started with part 1. So, our first, chapter 1, Panzerkampfwagen 8, the Mouse. So we're going to be talking about this first, the Mouse tank. Just scoot that. There we go. So, let us begin. If you ever find yourself in the mood to develop the world's largest armored fighting vehicle, the Germans would like to recommend that you name it after something really small. Maybe you could go with Flea, or Amoeba, or maybe even the Quark. The Germans went with Mouse, and look where it got them. The Germans thought, on second thought, don't look where it got them, because they spent half a century divided by the nations that defeated them. But hey, no one will forget good old go-getter Germany. They say there's no such thing as bad publicity. I'm looking at you, Holocaust Museum. That's a one hell of a joke, Mr. Parsons. Ha. Anyway, we're gonna move on. Oh, how about my dick? I mean, there's a submarine named that, so why not? So, next up. Let's see, let me continue. The Mouse is probably the most well-known of the super weapons still under development at the end of World War II. A functional prototype was finished, complete with armament, and survives in sort of restored condition in a Russian museum. The Mouse was enormous. It still dwarfs almost all modern armored vehicles. And adding to the mystique surrounding the Mouse are persistent rumors that the complete prototype was used in battle against the advancing Soviet forces. It is unlikely that the Mouse saw combat, but it is extremely difficult not to love the Germans' ironic humor in naming their largest tank after a diminutive mammal. So now on to the development history. The development of the Panzer VIII Mouse traces its roots back to 1941, when the German manufacturer Krupp began a comprehensive study of Soviet heavy tanks. For those who don't know, remember, this would be after Operation Barbarossa started, where the no, I apologize. Barbarossa took place in 1942. This is 1941. Never mind. But the heavy tanks were known to the German forces. It wouldn't be until Operation Barbarossa in 1942 where the German army groups were mentioning about how their tanks and anti-tank weapons could not stop the Soviet tanks, like the T-34. And yes, Soviet heavy tanks were being designed, but again, we wouldn't see a lot of them until way later in the war, like the IS-2. It was believed at the time that the Soviet tanks of the KV series were precursors to a line of Soviet super heavy tanks. Ah, yes, because the Russian Death Fridge, the Russian Death Fridge, makes a great super heavy tank. Sure. Okay, sure. Okay. Keep lying to yourself, but all right. With this mistaken belief came an order from Angry Mustache Man to begin, and no, that's not what the book says, but if I say his actual name, I'm going to get in trouble. So, yeah. Wait, that's yeah. No, that's the title of the book. My Tank is Fight. Yeah. With the mistaken belief came an order from Angry Mustache Man to begin design on a tank to succeed the Tiger, which was at the time entering pre-production. The order specified a tank weighing up to 90 tons, armed with either a 105 or 150 millimeter anti-tank gun, with a 5-man crew and a maximum speed of 44 kilometers per hour. Krupp submitted plans for 2 versions, light and heavy, of a tank it nicknamed the Lure or Lion. The Angry Mustache Man put De Fuhrer's rubber stamp on the project in 1942 and ordered Krupp to ditch the light Lion in favor of the supersized version. So, I want y'all to think about that for a minute. The thing weighs 90 tons. 90 tons! And they want it to go 44 kilometers per hour. Do you want it to grant wishes while we're at it? Like, that is insanity. Like, that is stupid. Like, yeah, what the fuck? Yeah, I know. And remember, again, it could have either a 105 or a 150 millimeter gun. To put that into perspective for you guys, 127 millimeter is 5 inches. You know, the same caliber that a U.S. destroyer used in World War II. So you want a gun that's bigger than 5 inches in diameter, you want it to weigh 90 tons, and you want it to go 44 kilometers per hour. I'm not an engineer, but, well, Adam, what do you think? Yeah, he's confused too. This makes no damn sense. But, oh well. So, along with the order to proceed on the Lion came a number of design tweaks. The heavy Lion initially included 100 millimeters of frontal armor protection. That's the same as the Tiger tank. That the Angry Mustache Man wanted increased to 140 millimeters. That's over an inch of mild steel. So that's not exactly an easy adjustment when weight factors in, especially when the Angry Mustache Man's next request was for an increase in the vehicle's speed. The Krupp design for the heavy Lion topped out at a pitiful 23 kilometers per hour. Angry Mustache Man demanded 30 kilometers per hour for the blood to be squeezed out of this stone. Oh, yeah, Krupp designers, did we mention that De Fuhrer himself has also asked you to change the 105mm gun to the 150mm gun? So, let's do some math real quick. 140 millimeters of armor. Like I said, over an inch of steel for frontal armor. It was already at 100 millimeters, and it was only capable of going 23 kilometers per hour. You want that up to 140 millimeters. You want a 150 millimeter gun, and you want it to go 30 kilometers per hour. Do you want them to invent anti-grav tech too? Like, y'all see the problem here. You don't just slap more armor and slap a bigger gun on it and then say, make it go faster. That's not how this works. Like, it's not. Ugh. Anyway, continuing. Krupp set to work, making revisions, while simultaneously hoping for the development of some sort of anti-grav.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not?
It's not possible. It's just not. Yeah. Krupp made the revisions while simultaneously hoping for the development of some sort of anti-gravity metal. Yeah, like I said, do you want them to invent anti-grav tech too? In late March 1942, Angry Mustache Man pulled the rug out from under the Krupp design team on the Heavy Lion project. He instructed them to join forces with one of his favorite designers, Ferdinand Porsche, in the development of the tank in the 120-ton range. 120 tons. Are you... Okay, sure, why not? To keep everyone happy, production of the eventual tank was to be split between Krupp and Alket. In April of 1942, a month later, the mammoth began to take shape on the drawing boards to meet a firm summer of 1943 deadline for the first pre-production model. Because of production delays in the as-yet unseen 150mm anti-tank gun, Angry Mustache Man agreed to a turret mounting both the 120mm gun and the 75mm L36.5 gun. So yeah, two guns. A 128, well, let's just call it a 5-inch. A 5-inch main gun, that's the one you see in the picture, and a coax 75mm gun. You know, the standard size you see on a Sherman. So, you want a massive 5-inch gun and a 75 coax gun and only 5 people to use this thing. Also, to answer the question earlier, why are there so many ladies on that drawing? It's to show how many people could fit inside the goddamn thing. Like, again, they wanted a crew of 5 to operate this thing. How? Like, how? Ugh. Anyway, these would be used until such a time as turrets and armament became available for the 150mm model. After more than a year of design and multiple name changes, the mouse emerged in the form of a wooden mock-up, presented to the Angry Mustache Man in May of 1943. The design weighed in at a bridge-bending 188 tons and required specially designed railway cars for transport. Angry Mustache Man ordered a production run of 150 because he liked big tanks, and I cannot lie. That is straight from the book, by the way. By the time the first turretless prototype chassis from Alket was undergoing testing at the Porsche Böblingen facility in December of 1943, Angry Mustache Man had already rescinded his production order. The prototype was dramatically underpowered, and further development continued despite the project's cancellation. By the summer of 1944, Krupp reported that 4 hulls were nearing completion. Shortly thereafter, all 4 hulls were ordered scrapped. Even then, work continued on the mouse. In September of 1944, the second prototype began testing at the Kummersdorf Proving Ground. This V2 prototype was equipped with a partially completed turret and dummy armament for testing purposes. When the Kummersdorf facility was overrun by the Soviets in 1945, the V2 prototype was destroyed. Accounts indicate that it was either destroyed by the Germans to prevent its capture, but there are some fanciful speculations that it engaged the Soviets in the defense of Kummersdorf. The V1 prototype and a third hull section were recovered from the facility by the Soviets. The V1 prototype survives with the repaired V2 turret mounted on it in the Museum of Armored Forces in Kubinka, Russia. So yeah, it actually exists. It exists in that the V1 hull has the the version 2 turret mounted on it. So, yeah, it's real. Just, again, kinda. Now, we're going to skip the technical mumbo-jumbo, because I don't want to bore y'all to death with that. So, let's move on to the historical analysis, shall we? According to Porsche, the final intent of the mouse was to plug gaps in the Atlantic Wall as a slightly mobile fortress. A sedentary role like this would have certainly avoided the mobility problems with the mouse. But it seems ridiculous when bunkers and in-place guns could have been, and were, produced much more rapidly and cheaply than the mouse. For a more believable view of the intended purpose of the Maus, I think it's best to look at when the project began. In the spring of 1942, the Germans were concerned about running into Soviet super heavy tanks. They had suffered some serious setbacks in the Soviet Union during the war during 1941 and 1942. But spring and summer saw the Germans advancing even further into Soviet territory than before. This was a victorious Germany still on the rise portion of the rise and fall of the Third Reich. Ultimately, Angry Mustache Man's decision to cancel official development of the Maus in late 1943 was one of his increasingly rare good ideas. Had the Maus entered service in late 1943 as planned, it might have been a significant psychological impact on the enemy. This effect would have gradually faded as tacticians developed solid ways to take it out of action. Given the pathetic speed and extremely high visible profile, I feel this would have happened in a month or less, depending on how numerous and vigorously employed the Maus was. Considered in a vacuum, devoid of the realities of war, the Maus was a mighty tank. It was armed and armored so heavily that the sight of one might give pause to an entire company of Allied tanks. Then reality, and infantry would creep up and throw demolition charges onto it when it inevitably got stuck somewhere. Or P-51s would dive from the sky and blast holes in it with rockets and bombs. Maybe a bold tank commander in a Pershing would circumvent and put a plug in its rear armor. Whatever its fate, the Maus was by no means the unobtainable, invulnerable tank that Angry Mustache Man so desperately wanted. Instead, it was a magnificent waste of resources. I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's an angry sore. It's a sore thumb of a tank. It's basically like Potential History said. It's the fat kid on the playground. It can punch really hard and it can take a beating, but once you run away from it, it can't catch you. So, and now there is a thing called hypothetical development history, hypothetical deployment history. In the book, these are hypothetical situations where the weapon or vehicle in question would be used. I'm going to ask you guys, do you want to hear those? They're not real. Again, they're hypothetical. But would you like to hear them? I think they're well put together. But if y'all just want to stick to the history stuff, we can do that. Oh, yes. Yes, yes. Okay. Then I will read. Before I do that, actually, hold 1 second. I forgot I do not have Mix It Up on. I should turn that on. Let's see. Give me a second. But yeah, look, the Maus tank is our first stop. We have way farther to go. Trust me, it's going to get crazy in here. Give me a minute. Mix It Up will come online, and then we'll get started again. I'm curious, so sure. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Come on, Mix It Up. Doesn't take that long. Or maybe it does. There it is. Okay. Give me a second. Let me just check this here. Make sure I, give me a second. Whoop, wrong one. Let's see. Okay, got it. Just wanted to make sure of that. That way, so I could see chat by, just glancing at my screen. All right. Hypothetical development history. Superschweres Panzerabteilung 400 departed from mustering near Stuttgart on December 6, 1943. Under the command of General Major Ferdinand Schuft, I thought that said Shaft for a minute. That would have been funny. Ferdinand Schuft, rail bridges in the vicinity of Ulm were incapable of carrying the entrained unit, so the 16 Maus tanks of Abteilung were forced to dismount and ford across the Danube River. Low waters were found, and the Maus tanks were able to cross without using their snorkels. Despite this, 4 tanks became inextricably mired in the freezing mud because of their weight and were left behind for engineering teams to recover. The remainder of the unit traveled on by rail to Krakow and was joined in late December by the surviving Maus detachment. By then, a 5th tank had become disabled due to overstressing of the suspension. It was cannibalized for parts and then dynamited by engineers of the sapper platoon. Its turret survived as a gun emplacement. During their travel, the Maus tanks had attracted a good deal of attention, despite efforts to move in secrecy. Persistent attacks by Soviet aircraft forced the tanks into nocturnal travel schedules and resulted into a 6 mouths being lost to a frozen pond concealed by snow in the vicinity of Zhytomyr. Superschwer's Panzerabteilung 400 linked up with units of the 17th Corps and formed a defensive line west of Zhytomyr in preparation for a counterattack. A Soviet offensive to encircle Zhytomyr had begun on Christmas Day and was still underway. On December 26, Schuft detached a platoon of mouse tanks to bolster the defenses within the city. German forces had already retreated into the city itself, and bitter fighting was erupting all along the eastern fringe of Zhytomyr. On December 27th, the Russians encountered a mouse of the Superschwer's Panzerabteilung. 11 Soviet tanks, including 2 heavy tanks, were lost before the mouse was disabled by a hit to the suspension. German forces destroyed the abandoned tank and over the following days were forced to retreat into the outskirts of the city. Soviet forces pushed in towards Zhytomyr, hammering it with artillery in an effort to close the pincer around the Germans. General Major Schuft, who had been ordered to hold his remaining tanks in reserve, advanced on January 5th against heavy Russian resistance and temporarily smashed the leading edge of the northern arm of the encirclement. 2 mouse tanks were disabled, but later repaired, and a third was abandoned and destroyed. Despite urging by officers in the Zhytomyr area, angry Mustache Man refused to allow a retreat. So, as hypothetical, I know this is a hypothetical situation, but that actually happened. Angry Mustache Man had this thing called these ideas called fortress cities. The idea is that the units that were cut off in cities were to hold their ground and fight to the last man. They were not to retreat, and they were not to surrender. All this did was lead to German troops that could have been used elsewhere getting cut off, surrounded, and basically wiped out. Some of them surrendered anyway. This is just, it's a waste of manpower. But it was the whole idea of, I'm not giving up land, so fight to the death. No, not a good idea. Photographs of the mouse began to appear in German and Allied print media. The US and British press enraged the angry Mustache Man by repeatedly referring to the mouse tanks as his only battleships. The Germans released a newsreel showing Abteilung 400 in formation before embarkation at Stuttgart. Joseph Stalin countered soon after with footage of Soviet troops laughing and lounging on the wreckage of a mouse tank. Encirclements of the Zhytomyr area was completed by the first week of January, but tenacious resistance kept the pincers open. Abteilung 400, by then reduced to only 4 tanks, effected a breakout to the west through blizzard conditions, with survivors from other units in the cauldron. During the retreat west, all the mouse tanks experienced breakdowns and were abandoned and destroyed. Further production of the mouse was halted, and Panzerabteilung 400 was disbanded. On March 4th, General Major Schuft was transferred to the top-secret Landkreuzerl Befehl Phoenix, being formed in Berlin. I know. This actually sounded like it. Yeah, I know. That's why this book is so good. These hypothetical situations are written like they actually happened. But that's the end of the first chapter. On to chapter 2, which means we're going to need a new picture down here. So, you guys are probably thinking, well, wait, Zaruk, if the mouse was the first thing, what's next? Oh, sweet summer children, sweet visitors of my forest. You have no idea what's coming next. Chapter 2 is about this. If you know what this is, you know what it is. And if you don't know, you're about to learn. Oh, wait, there's more. Yeah, there's more, all right. There we go. So now, let us talk. It's a metal slug boss. I know, right? Well, let us now talk about Chapter 2, Landkreuzerl P-1000 Rat. This is the rat. The world will probably never see an armored land vehicle on the scale of the rat. Tellingly, the Germans didn't even refer to it as a tank. They called it a Landkreuzerl. The rat was so large that its dimensions had more in common with a naval vessel than a tank. It had the crew complement of at least 4 heavy tanks, armament usually seen mounted on heavy cruisers such as Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Okay, first of all, that's a typo. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were battleships, not heavy cruisers. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, however you say it, they're battleships. And enough anti-aircraft weaponry to ward off waves of attacking fighter bombers. It was 35 meters long, as tall as some church steeples, and so wide that maneuvering in an urban area would have been either impossible or apocalyptic. The rat was so heavy that it would have shattered and churned pavement like a plow through sod and collapsed all but a handful of bridges in Germany. The rat's much smaller cousin, the mouse, turned out to be a ruinous waste of resources for very little applications in combat. Had the rat's development progressed even a fraction as far as the mouse, it would have devastated Germany. The rat was so large that it would have required naval-scale manufacturing, with months of skilled laborers' time involved in the construction of each individual tank. Just building and assembling its components would have required transportation and handling equipment usually relegated to a shipyard. I will let that sink in. This thing was so fucking big that had it been made, they would have needed naval shipyards to make it. Why the fuck is there a Baneblade on? That's not a Baneblade, that's a rat. It's a Landcruiser. And the rat is way bigger than a Baneblade. So, it is probably to the detriment of the world that the rat project was canceled. It would have been cool just to see one of these hideous machines built, and more important, it would have taken the place of perhaps 50 or 100 more useful tanks like the Panther or Panzer IV. Bigger. Did you miss the part where I said, hold on. Did you miss the part where I said it was 35 meters long and as tall as a church steeple? Yeah. It's huge. Why? Yeah, why not? Let's see. The rat would have meant an earlier end to hostilities in Europe, and it would have provided a damn hot ticket at a museum in the United States or the Soviet Union. So, I'm going to read off some of the stuff for you guys here. Crew, 20 plus. So, more than 20. Weight. You guys ready for this? Weight, 1,000 metric tons minimum. 2,000 plus tons estimated. So at minimum, it would have been 1,000 metric tons. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fucking Titan. Yeah, it's a Titan. Let's see. Propulsion. All right, I want you guys to guess. How would you move this? What do you guys think? How would you move this? You guys have any idea? A fusion reactor. How about 8 ship engines? 8 Daimler-Benz MB501 20-cylinder marine diesel engines, or 2 24-cylinder marine diesel engines. So, ship engines, basically. Diesel ship engines. And you want to know the dumbest part? Yeah, 1 engine for each section, yeah. And you guys want to know the dumbest part? You guys want to guess how fast they thought this thing would go? Can you fathom how fast they thought this thing would go if it was built? 40 kilometers per hour. You know, neighborhood driving speed. 40 kilometers per hour. That fucking thing? That thing. 40 kilometers per hour. The mouse couldn't even... Yeah. Good luck getting it above 10. The mouse was supposed to reach 40, and it only made... Hold on. The mouse was supposed to make 30. Hold on. Yeah, it only made 13. You expect that monster to get 40 kilometers per hour? I think not, sir. Anyway, Length, 35 meters. Width, 14 meters. Height, 11 meters. So, I will put that into perspective for you guys. A meter is usually like, softballing it, again, I know I'm wrong here, bear with me. A meter is usually 3 feet. Like, I'm rounding here. So that is... So that is 105 feet long, 33 feet wide, 42 feet wide, and 33 feet tall. No. Daft, preposterous, locked in the realm of insanity. Oh. Oh boy. You guys want to know what the weapons were? This is where it gets ridiculous. Armament. 2 280mm guns. 1 128mm gun. 8 20mm flak guns. And 2 15mm machine guns. Yeah, that giant turret was supposed to be on a battleship. 280mm guns up top, a 128mm gun mounted in the front, and then the 8 anti-air guns mounted to the back. Because, sure. I'm not even going to read the armor thickness here. Like, it's all unknown because it was never built, so we don't know. Anyway, time for the development history. The development history of the Rat originates with a 1941 strategic study of Soviet heavy tanks conducted by Krupp. Hey, it's the same thing that the Mouse was being built off of. The study also gave birth to the Rat's smaller and more practical relative, the Mouse, practical in regards to what's more realistic, I think. From the start, the Mouse was envisioned as an even larger and more formidable version of a heavy tank, while the Rat was to be a class of vehicle unto itself. Yeah, I can see that. This 1941 study produced a suggestion from Director of Engineering Grote, who worked for the U-boat arm of the Ministry of Armaments. In June of 1942, Grote proposed a 1,000-ton tank that he termed a Landcruiser, equipped with naval armament and armored so heavily that only similar naval armament could hope to touch it. To compensate for the immense weight of the vehicle, the Rat would have sported 3 1.2-meter-wide tread assemblies on each side, totaling a tread width of 7.2 meters. That's over 21 feet of tread width. God damn, that's a big boy. This helped with the stability and weight distribution of the Rat. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. But its sheer mass would have destroyed pavement and prevented bridge travel. Fortunately, the height of the Rat and its nearly 2 meters of ground clearance would have allowed it to ford many rivers with ease. Ah, yes, we're looking on the positive side of things. At least it can cross rivers. Sure. Okay.
Bigger.
Okay, look, there's no way you're going to make me as big as that thing. Actually, that would be a funny picture. Like me reading about it, saying, if you want to know how tall this thing is, it's as tall as I am right now. That would be kind of funny, honestly. Anyway. Angry Mustache Man became Actually, no, that would be funny as fuck. Like, can you guys imagine that for like for a reading, for like the thing I use for when I'm reading? Like when I'm going to do a reading stream, just have a picture of me sitting there with a tiny book and saying, this is how tall a rat was, as tall as I am. That'd be funny as hell. Someone should do that. Yeah, it can cross rivers where it will become vulnerable to most boats. Yeah. Angry Mustache Man became enamored with the idea of a truly super tank and ordered Krupp to set to work developing the Rat. While development of the Rat does not seem to have progressed very far, some sources believe that that a turret was completed for the Rat and then used as a fixed gun emplacement in Norway. Actually, that's actually true, by the way, but not in the way you think. So, yes, there was a gun emplacement in Norway that featured a triple turret design, a triple gun design instead of a double gun design, like the picture there. That was a turret that it was actually a prototype turret that was not equipped on, I think, Gneisenau? Yeah, I think it was supposed to go on Gneisenau, but they never attached it. So, that fixed gun emplacement could have been the main main turret on the Rat, but it never happened. So, the more you know. Anyway, despite references in texts about the Rat, there was no concrete evidence to support the existence of this emplacement in Norway. Actually, there kind of is. We have a picture of it. We just don't know if that's the one. More likely, these authors have mistaken the turret...
Bigger.
More likely, these authors have mistaken the turret similar to those of the heavy cruiser Gneisenau for the prototype Rat turret. Yeah, like I said, it was a prototype turret for Gneisenau. Also, again, Gneisenau was a battleship, not a heavy cruiser. I mean, okay, if you want to be picky, you could call her a battle cruiser, but no, she was a battleship. Anyway, Gneisenau was broken up in 1944, and its turrets were used as emplacements near Rotterdam and Holland. Similar turrets were used near Trondheim in Norway, which was the supposed location of the Rat turret. Development of the Rat was cancelled in 1943 by the dangerously wise German Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer. Speer exhibited an uncanny ability to cancel the more moronic and wasteful of Angry Mustache Man's pet projects and focus German resources on proven weapon systems. Yeah, Albert Speer was the head of the Interior, I think. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, head of the Ministry of Armaments. So, yeah, he was the one who came along and said, no, this is stupid. All right, so. Time for the analysis, and then we'll get to the hypothetical stuff. The Rat was a very problematic vehicle. Oh, you think? And its size was responsible for most of the issues it would have encountered on a hypothetical battlefield. A Rat on the move would have been relegated to fields and countrysides because of its road-destroying weight. Without bridges as a river crossing option, the Rat would have been unable to cross flooded or deep rivers, and scouting parties might have wasted lengthy periods and squandered lives finding a crossing point. It probably could have if they didn't get out of the way. Gunners on the Rat would have found it awkward to engage targets from close or medium range with even a hull-mounted 128mm gun. Concealing the Rat from aircraft would have required a blimp hangar or some sort of bizarre camouflage that would make it resemble a building. Such camouflage is feasible, if comical, but it would have been useless the first time ground units spotted the Rat. From that point on, the Rat would have been constantly harassed by fighter bombers. Even if the Rat's 20mm anti-aircraft guns had managed to drive these off, it was such an enormous target that high-altitude bombers could have been employed against it. So, I'll put that into perspective. This thing would have been so big that B-17s could have flown over and dropped bombs on it. Like, they didn't need precision bombing. It was so fucking fat that they could have just launched a saturation attack on it and just bombed it till it stopped moving. It would have made flooded areas and sank into the mud. Yeah, probably. Not everything was bad about the Rat, however. Infantry would have been less of a risk than with the Mouse because of the numbers of point defense weapons and the space for infantry to ride on the vehicle's hull. It likely would have served as the cornerstone of a unit or more normal military vehicles, and these would have assisted in defending it from enemy tanks and aircraft. Enemy armor posed almost no threat to the Rat. They might have destroyed things like the anti-aircraft guns on the turret or damaged radio antennas or weapon optics, but beyond minor damage, enemy tanks were toys next to this mammoth vehicle. Enemy artillery was slightly more threatening and became downright dangerous if a Rat made the mistake of staying within range of a naval bombardment. Hi, these 16-inch guns say, fuck you. The greatest strength of the Rat would have been its ability to single-handedly halt a major enemy offensive. It would have been slow and poor on the attack, but the sight of a rat looming out of the fog on a battlefield would have almost immediately scattered enemy ground forces. If they didn't flee right away, they would once they realized their weapons were nearly useless against it. Make no mistake, the astronomical cost of building one would have not been offset by its strengths. Once deployed and used in combat, it was just a matter of time before enemy aircraft destroyed it. With poor speed and limitations on terrain, the Rat would have not have enjoyed the same advantages of a wide-open sea battle as its naval counterparts. The Rat could have turned the tide of a single battle at the cost of a campaign. So yeah, silly things are silly. But we're not done. We still have to look at the, like I said, the the hypothetical stuff. So let's do that now. All right. So hypothetical deployment history. Yeah, I just looked up a scale for how large it is. Holy fuck. Yeah, no joke. Anyway, so you guys love the hypothetical stuff. So here is a hypothetical scenario. Construction began on 3 Landcruiser Rats in July of 1943 at modified shipyards in Hamburg. Bombing and attacks throughout the year delayed the construction significantly. The first Rat was completed in March of 1944, and it was moved, with difficulty, to a stage... Hi, Fountain. How you doing, baby?
Show love 100. Hi, baby. Tilda. Hi, everyone. Hype love 1 Zaruk George Zaruquists.
The Rat was moved with difficulty to a staging area east of Berlin. Yeah, sorry, Fountain. We already did the reaction stuff. Now I'm reading. Training began for the crews of Landcruiser Befehl Phoenix as the unit awaited the arrival of its 2 remaining vehicles. In the meantime, a force of Panzers and Panzer Grenadiers were formed into 3 Kampfgruppen with a Rat as the centerpiece of each. The second Rat arrived in late April 1944. The third was bombed and damaged beyond repair while still under construction. The Allies believing that they destroyed an unusual light cruiser prototype. On August 15th, 1944, former Maus commander General Major Ferdinand Schuft, he's back, took charge of Landcruiser Gruppe 216, consisting of 1 Rat, Midgarschlang, some 30 Panzers, dozens of lighter vehicles, and almost 1,000 infantrymen. The unit was to be deployed to engage Soviet forces approaching the German border through Poland, and on August 26th, lead elements engaged in a moving skirmish with the Soviet tank armies. General Major Schuft ordered his troops into ambush position from his command Rat and moved his own vehicle into relative concealment inside of a primeval forest. Radio aerials extending well past the treetops were camouflaged with bark and leaves. On August 28th, the tip of the Soviet advance was engaged in force and turned back without the direct involvement of the lurking Rat. The following day, however, the Soviets withdrew to assess the Germans' force disposition. On the night of August 29th, the panzers and light vehicles rumbled out of the forest with the Midgarschlang lumbering behind them. Scouts reached the Soviet lines in the gloomy light of pre-dawn, and the Rat immediately began a devastating bombardment of Soviet rear echelons. The panzers and infantry advanced into the Soviet lines, and the battle grew intense. Wondering where the heavy artillery was situated, Soviet commanders dispatched several scout aircraft. One happened upon the Rat as it continued to move towards Soviet lines, but was shot down by anti-aircraft fire before it could notify ground forces. By noon, the Rat was visible as an ominous shape in the distance. At 12:30, the badly mauled panzers and infantry fell back with the Soviets in hot pursuit. As they pulled away, the Rat began to open fire with its 280mm guns in the direct fire role. Soviet tank forces were pummeled and smashed. Those vehicles that got close enough to fire quickly realized their folly. The tanks withdrew, and Soviet artillery batteries exchanged fire with the Rat. The rat got the better of them, but also began sustaining damage from the volume of fire being directed at it. By the late afternoon, most of the rat's anti-aircraft guns had been knocked out, and the 280mm guns were down to their last 15 shells. With dusk gathering, Soviet fighter bombers attacked in a force, screaming down on the nearly defenseless rat. At 6:23, a 500-pound bomb penetrated the engine deck and destroyed all but 2 of the engines. The rat was incapable of doing anything more than turning slowly and rotating its turret. General Major Schuft ordered the rat to be evacuated and demolished, but at 6:29, a second 500-pound bomb penetrated the top armor of the turret and struck the remaining shells in the rat's magazine. With a roar and a flash of fire, the mighty Midgardschlang was decapitated. General Schuft and all but a few lucky crewmen were killed by the explosion and the ensuing fires that raged throughout the scarred hull. The remaining rat was rushed to engage the Soviets, but was destroyed by American long-range bombers before it reached enemy lines. So there's your hypothetical for that one. Now, technically, we should go on to Chapter 3, but we're going to come back to Chapter 3 because I feel like we should talk about one other thing before we move on to the next chapter. Because, you see, there's one other aspect that people don't know about when it comes to the rat. You see, had it been built, good luck with that, but had it been built, there was actually another variant of it. So, the rat is the P-1000. Would you all like to see the P-1500? God, this is so dumb. Alright. Okay. So, as I said, this is the P-1000. Allow me to introduce you to the P-1500. Here it is. This is the P-1500. The monster.
Oh no.
Oh no is right. So, yeah. It's basically a rat body with a railway gun on it. Yeah, it's silly. But I'm not going to use this picture for it. Oh no. I've got a better picture. So, this is so dumb. I hope this is the right one. Yeah, this is so dumb, but it's great for scale. Yeah, there it is. If you guys want a size comparison. So, yeah. Compensating for something, aren't we? Just, good Lord, look at that thing. Look at that thing. Oh, Lord have mercy. Yeah. So, yeah. Basically, a rat body with a railway gun on it. So, let's read about that, shall we? The aptly named monster. So, let us begin. Where all things do, the beginning. And when I come to the end, I'll stop. And holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that? Yeah, it's every artillery guy's wet dream. That's what it is. Developed as an offshoot of Krupp's previous work with large self-propelled artillery and its experience with the brief RAT program, the P-1500 Monster was an effort to wed an ultra-heavy Land Cruiser chassis with the largest artillery piece ever built. The 800mm Dora was an incredibly powerful weapon capable of penetrating a meter of armor or reinforced concrete. You may have seen one of roughly 250,000 different documentaries about this railway gun. Hampered by its confinement to railways, Krupp hoped to set it free like a beautiful butterfly by replacing an entire rail convoy with a huge super tank. Built around the over 1,300-ton, including railway, carriage, Dora gun, the monster would have possessed dimensions even larger than the Rat. With allowances for armored magazines, each high-explosive shell weighed nearly 5 metric tons, reloading cranes, defensive armament, and 2 150mm howitzers. Such a massive undertaking would have required elaborate engineering feats and the resources of much of Krupp's vast industrial empire. A girl can dream. Okay, so let's read through the statistics here, shall we? Crew, 100 plus. You would need over 100 men to make that thing work. Weight, 2,500 metric tons, estimated. Propulsion, 4 2,200 horsepower U-boat engines. Speed, 15 kilometers per hour, estimated. Yeah, bullshit. I don't think so. Length. Length, 42 meters. That's over 120 feet, by the way. Width, 18 meters. That's 54 feet. Height, not including the gun, 7 meters, or 21 feet. Armament, 1 800mm Gustav railway gun, who inhaled 10 kilos of white powder. Everyone at Krupp, apparently. Development history. One fine November morning, angry Mustache Man awoke from his dreams of conquest, leapt from bed in naught but his bare bodkin, and cried out across the sleepy town of Obersalzberg, "Let them build a tracked artillery carriage as high as these mountains!" Or possibly not. Whatever fever dream of massive vehicles drove this madness, angry Mustache Man instructed Krupp to turn his beloved 800mm Dora artillery piece into a self-propelled weapon. With Krupp's plan for the super tank Rat a recent memory, the designers at Krupp worked to set the christened Monster. A monster it would have been. Mounted to its railway car, the 800mm gun tipped the scales at 1,344 tons. Each high explosive shell weighed almost 4,800 kilograms, and each of the armor-piercing rounds weighed an astonishing 7,502 kilograms. For comparison, the famed British Tallboy bomb, so adept at bunker busting, weighed a mere 5,443 kilograms. So to put that into perspective for everyone, the British Tallboy bomb, you know, the bomb that you could only carry one of them, and the bombing bay doors had to be removed so it could fit, and you could it had to be dropped from a Lancaster, and it would fall straight down and punch through armor. Weighed 5,500 kilograms rounded up. The armor-piercing rounds of this artillery piece weighed 7,500 kilograms. That's 2,000 more kilograms than the Tallboy. Yeah, basically, yeah, a moving bunker. If that. Unfortunately, no known drawings of the monster survived the war, but it is known that Krupp completed its design in December of 1942. It proposed a heavily armored and tracked gun carriage weighing over 1,500 tons, and armed with secondary artillery and machine guns. Angry Mustache Man was quite excited by the design, but the eternal killjoy Albert Speer forbade Krupp from committing its resources to the construction of a prototype. Speer was well aware that Der Führer would greenlight a tracked baby pram if it were proposed on an impressively large scale. Angry Mustache Man sulked, and Krupp returned to work on other projects. Analysis. Leopold and Robert were the names the Germans gave to a pair of 280mm railway guns located near the beaches of Anzio. When the Americans landed troops at Anzio, the guns became collectively known as Anzio Annie, and they plagued the beachhead until a breakout was achieved. Despite nearly total Allied air superiority, large amounts of artillery, and naval bombardment, Anzio Annie could not be silenced. When the Americans broke out of the beachhead in early June and found the guns, they realized why the artillery had survived. The guns, mounted on their rail cars, would trundle out of a cave to fire on the beach. When counter-battery fire started to pound in or bombers were heard, the guns would travel back inside the safety of the cave. The 800-millimeter guns of Dora and Gustav were not nearly so flexible. Firing them required specially laid tracks and hours of preparation. In this area, and at staggering expense, the monster would have been superior to the railway versions of the 800mm gun. Without the need for hours of preparation and rail lines, the monster could have sheltered inside a specifically made bunker or a really, 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 really big cave, only to emerge and pummel any enemies in range of its massive gun. Deployed in the field, however, the monster would have been an even easier target for Allied air power than the Rat. Ponderously slow to the point that infantry might have outpaced it at a jog, and unable to fire on the move, the monster would have fallen well behind any advancing army. Not that the Germans would have conceivably been advancing, no matter how fast the monster was pushed into production. The biggest weakness would have been its 800mm gun, ironically. The enormous target was virtually unarmored. Components could have been destroyed by enemy fire, and the crew serving the weapon would have been vulnerable to shrapnel. With the gun knocked out of action, the monster would have been a crawling bunker. The beast would have been intimidating even then, but not much of a threat to a commander with a few dozen brave men who could run fast and throw demolition charges. Or a thermite. That works too. Now to the hypotheticals. I'm excited. Are you guys excited? Hypothetical development history. Krupp's design for the monster was approved in August of 1942, and construction immediately began on the two artillery pieces. Development of the chassis became a joint project between Krupp and Mann engineers. Let's see. Who had developed the engines that were to be used inside of the monster. A 1x24 scale model was produced at the Krupp Special Projects Facility number 23, and this met with the approval of both Angry Mustache Man and, reluctantly, Albert Speer. The first gun was completed in June of 1943 and was christened Friedrich, but nicknamed Das Kleine Obergefleit, the Little Corporal, as a joke. Making fun of Angry Mustache Man. The nickname stuck, but the poor little corporal did not have a chassis. Recoil compensation was inadequate on the full-size chassis, and it was found that the pressure of firing the gun could deform or even shatter tread links. Throughout the summer of 1943, designers toiled away and tested more than a dozen systems that could reduce the recoil force on the chassis. How many locomotives would be needed to move it? Good lord, who knows? The stress on the treads was ultimately reduced by adding 4 hydraulic jacks in the 8-meter-long booms. These booms set flush with the hull during travel and would then be rotated, extended, and slotted into grooves on the top armor with electric winches. Combined with a slide mount of the gun carriage and its pneumatic return system, the gun could be fired after only 40 or 50 minutes of preparation, with minimal damage to the chassis. It should be noted that the Schwer Gustav, the actual one, took about 15 minutes to reload. Like, it could fire, and then it would take 15 to 20 minutes to reload. This took 4 times that. So, is it really worth it at that point? The second gun was finished in October of 1943 and was later dubbed the Berlin gun by Joseph Goebbels in a propaganda broadcast. In a twist of fate, it would be the Little Corporal that ultimately served in Berlin's final days. The Little Corporal was fitted to its chassis in February of 1944, and the vehicle was dispatched to France. where it was intended to serve as part of the mostly imaginary Atlantic Wall. During transit, the Little Corporal was unintentionally bombed by a damaged British Lancaster that was simply jettisoning its bomb load. Luckily for the Germans, the Lancaster crashed and the crew was killed, although days later, the Allies learned about the gun from the French resistance fighters who had witnessed its movements. The damaged Little Corporal was laboriously shifted back to Krupp facilities for repairs and an overhaul. In May of 1944, the Berlin gun became operational and was given the task originally designed to the Little Corporal. On May 28, as it trundled into France, the gun was sabotaged by French resistance fighters assisted by British commandos. The raid ultimately failed, but the damage to the gun rendered it immobile until it could be repaired. The next afternoon, a massive American bombing raid descended on the Berlin gun and utterly destroyed it. Repairs on the Little Corporal were finally completed in late 1944 of September. Angry Mustache Man, still stinging over the destruction of the gun's twin, ordered a special firing bunker built in the center of Berlin. This was completed with slave labor in January of 1945, and the gun was shifted there with great difficulty. The sight of the massive vehicle slowly churning over bombed-out rubble was both awe-inspiring and terrible for the beleaguered citizens of Berlin. Though the firing bunker was repeatedly attacked by the Americans, the British, and eventually the Soviets, the gun survived to shell the Soviet armies that encircled Berlin. From April 15th through April 19th, the gun was in action for several hours each day. With German artillery forces in and around Berlin largely scattered and low on ammunition, the huge gun was in high demand with commanders. On April 19th, with the Soviets threatening a breakthrough at Seelow Heights, the crew of the Little Corporal launched a total of 18 rounds. At one point, the crew desperately loaded and fired, with artillery landing less than 100 meters away. On April 20th, the Soviets began to shell the bunker itself, and their air attacks became more focused and persistent. On the 20th and 21st combined, the Little Corporal managed to fire a total of 3 rounds. The gun did not fire again until April 27th, when it emerged amid heavy shelling under the direct orders of Angry Mustache Man to fire the gun or be executed for cowardice. Although the armed crew outnumbered the SS men sent to enforce that order by 20-1, they complied. The gun spoke once before damage was sustained. In the time it took to fire, nearly 100 crewmen were killed. That night, many of the survivors attempted to desert the monster. Some succeeded. Most were caught and hung from lampposts or shot to death. On April 30th, the remaining crewmen and a Volkssturm unit battled against Soviet shock troops around the monster, and in some cases, even on top of and inside the vehicle. The fighting was brutal and lasted late into the night. But at 4:17 a.m., the last of the crew surrendered, and the shell-marked Little Corporal belonged to the Soviets. Berlin did not last much longer. Now, we're going to backpedal a little bit. We're going to go back to Chapter 3, because that's actually the end of the land weapons. Everything else is air and sea. We're going to go back to Chapter 3 now. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone here has heard of the V1 buzz bomb and the V2 rocket. Like, everyone's heard of the V weapons, the vengeance weapons. Well, turns out there was actually a V3. Did you guys know that? There was a V1, which was the buzz bomb, the V2, which was the giant rocket, and then there was the V3. A lot of people don't know about the V3, for good reason, as I'm about to show y'all. Let me show y'all the V3. So, I know what some of y'all are probably thinking. Oh, what is it, Zaruk? Is it some kind of giant multi-stage rocket? What is it? No. It's the giant artillery piece built into a mountain. You know, because, why not, right? So yeah, this is the V3 system, which I will explain. As one historian put it, when you absolutely positively need to make London go away, you get the V3. So, yeah, a little bit of context before we start reading. This thing's a piece of shit. The V3 artillery piece could hit one place, London. That's it. It couldn't hit anything else, only London. To be fair, though, it could fire artillery shells from France all the way into London, so that's pretty cool. Pet George? All right, there you go. So, there's that, I guess. Sorry, I just had to wet my whistle real quick. Also, before we begin on this chapter, I need to know, are you guys enjoying this? Like, you guys enjoying this stuff? Like, we'll do more read-along stuff like this, but I thought this book would be a good first introduction. So I hope y'all are having fun. Hell, some of y'all might be asleep. Fountain Stranger has told me that my voice is really soothing when I'm quiet, and she's fallen asleep to it before, so maybe some of y'all have. That doesn't mean ASMR streams are coming. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Anyway. The V3... Oh. How do I say that? I don't know how to say that. Okay, I'm going to type this out. I wish Andrea was here. She speaks German, but I'm going to type this out for you guys. This is how you spell it. There you go. That's how you spell it. The V3 Hochdruckpump? I do not know how to say that. I don't even know what it translates to. Anyway. Let us begin. By 1944, the Allied bombings of German cities and military facilities were proving to be a public relations disaster for the Ratzis. It's pretty hard to talk about how awesome the Reich is and how you're beating everyone so badly when the British and Americans are raining fire on you almost daily and nightly. Fortunately for the Ratzis, there were 3 wonder weapons almost ready to be unleashed on the unsuspecting Allies. In June of 1944, the Germans began their exceedingly expensive bombardment of Greater London using the V1 flying bombs, or buzz bombs. Imagine a really crappy and inaccurate cruise missile that made a scary noise, and that was pretty much what the V1s were. They were followed in September 1944 by the V2 rockets developed by Wernher von Braun. Wernher von Braun. That name holds great significance to the United States rocket program, to NASA, and to, well, yeah, just rocketry and space exploration in general. Hey, Raleigh, what's up? Yes, Wernher von Braun. That, well, it's WERNHER. That's Werner, and then von Braun. Yeah, Wernher von Kern. Yeah. So what's up, Raleigh? And yeah, Wernher von Braun is like the father of American rocketry. He was pinched by the Allied forces near the end of the war, and he was the greatest rocket scientist that the Allies could have gotten. Hochdruckpumpe. Yeah, I can't even say it. Oh, you did. Please post it. Post it in non-speakers. I want to see this. I'm sorry, everyone. I have to see this. Put it in non-speakers or in the art section. I want to see this. Please. Like, put it in art. You have... Oh, you can't post it yet. Okay, it's not done yet. Okay, got it. Well, when it is done, let me know. Anyway, sorry about that, everyone. Let's get back to reading. So, where were we? Right. Now, the V designation came from the German word... Came from the German word Vergeltungswaffe. it means vengeance. I want to see when it's done. How do I get it? Oh, if you want to be part of the Discord community, Meme Lord, just put !Discord in the chat. It'll give you a link to our Discord community. But yeah, please send it to me, Raleigh. I want to see it. That's perfect. Oh, he's going to hate me for that idea. You can tell him it was my idea. Like, you can tell him, yeah, Zaruk came up with the idea. I'm sure he'll hate me for that. It looks great. Anyway. Vergeltungswaffe, meaning vengeance weapon or reprisal weapon. Oh, it was 100. Oh, yeah, that's true. It was 100% your idea before I mentioned. Yeah, you're right. You're right. See, the Ratsy suave PR cripple-footed Joseph Goebbels put the term to good use in radio broadcasts, describing the horrors the Ratsies were unleashing on the British as repayment for the Allied bombing campaign. Despite the Ratsy histrionics, neither the V1 nor the V2 really did much more than scare the population of London. But Angry Mustache Man had another trick up his sleeve. The V3 battery, being constructed by slave labor underground at Mimolek, France. Unlike the V1 and the V2, the V3 was basically a set of 5 giant artillery pieces permanently aimed at London. These unusual guns used a series of explosive side chambers to accelerate a 140-kilogram shell up to 1,500 meters per second and send it across the channel and into London. Yeah, you guys heard that right. It's basically it's like a railgun without magnets. It's a kinetic-launched railgun. Like, the explosive side chambers propel the shot faster and faster. So, yeah, that is... I'll let that sink in for a second. A kinetic, explosive-powered railgun. Yeah. The explosive potential of a 140-kilogram charge was not that significant, but with several 5-gun batteries, the Germans believed they could fire a projectile at London once every 12 seconds. Explosive-powered railgun. Yeah, because I'll read it again. These unusual guns used a series of explosive side chambers to accelerate a 140-kilogram shell to 1,500 meters per second. So the side chambers would literally keep pushing. I thought railguns used magnets to, like, continuously accelerate rounds, though. Whatever, I'm not a scientist. So, yeah, they believed they could fire a projectile at London once every 12 seconds. Since the projectiles were not actually rockets, they could be produced relatively cheaply. As long as the underground bunker containing the V3 guns survived and ammunition was available, the Germans could maintain a devastating barrage on England's capital. Angry Mustache Man's plans for the V3 came to a dramatic end before the first V2 rockets began to rain down on London. With the battery nearing completion in July of 1944, the British managed to drop 3 huge tallboy bombs down the uncovered shafts of the V3 guns. The bunker was heavily damaged. Before it could be repaired, the Germans abandoned the bunker in the face of the advancing Allied land invasion. So, now for its, hold on. Here it is, the development history. By 1941, August Coenders, an engineer at the Reuchling Steelworks, came up with the idea of using electrically activated charges in angled side chambers to accelerate a cannon-fired projectile beyond the maximum velocity attainable through normal means. His idea was not completely original. During the U.S. Civil War, 2 inventors had tried and failed to construct a similar gun and managed only to blow up their prototype. Nevertheless, Coinders convinced his bosses that his proposal was worth exploring, and they took it to the German High Command. Approval and funding was granted for a subscale prototype of the gun to demonstrate the principles beyond its operation. Construction of a functional prototype was completed in 1943. Testing commenced in May of that year in Poland under the supervision of SS General and V Project's diva Hans Kammler. The 60-meter-long miniature V3 was successful in launching a specially designed discarding sabot round over 15 kilometers. The discarding sabot round was a dart-like submunition. Once it exited the barrel of the V3, the case or sabot surrounding the dart would fall away, thereby allowing fins on the shell to stabilize its flight path. Those who witnessed the test of the scaled-down V3 were very impressed, and Angry Mustache Man's love for artillery inspired him to place a preposterous order for 150 full-sized guns. Jesus, 150? Good Lord, man. What are you going to do, hollow out the entire mountain range? Good Lord. The order of 150 V3 guns was divided into 5-gun batteries. Mimolek, France, in the Calais region, was selected as the first site for the V3 batteries. 5 of these 5-gun batteries were to be constructed, theoretically allowing the Germans to fire 300 shells an hour at London from Mimolek. Construction began on the first of these batteries in September of 1943. Each gun consisted of interlocking 5-meter lengths of barrel with 2 attached side chambers where the explosive charges were placed. When connected, these interlocking tubes created a total barrel length of 150 meters, all sunken into an angled shaft dug into the ground. The mouths of these gun tunnels were capped with 5-meter thick slabs of concrete that could be slowly rotated out of the way so that the guns could fire. Surrounding the gun battery was an elaborate bunker complex with space for ammunition storage, command and control, and even sleeping quarters and a dining area. This vast complex took hundreds of slave laborers nearly a full year to prepare. Sorry, my back. Meanwhile, the French resistance notified the Allies of the location of the underground bunker, and in November of 1944, the Allied bombing raids began. For months, these bombings did little to disrupt the construction of the bunker. Even the 5,400-kilogram bunker-busting tall boy bombs used by the British proved insufficient to penetrate the incredibly thick concrete walls of the bunker. The spinal columns of the V3 guns were very unusual looking and developed several nicknames. Official German documents referred to the V3 as Hochdruckpump, or high-pressure pump, partially as a means of concealing the weapon's true identity. The guns also developed the whimsical nicknames of Pausenflöger, meaning millipede, and Fliegslichtchen, or Fliegbelichtchen, meaning busy lily. In July of 1944, the bunker was nearly completed, and the Germans began to prepare the V3 for test firing. On July 6th, an Allied bombing raid struck where the concrete domes covering the gun shafts were open. Unbeknown to the Allies, 3 of their tall boy bombs dropped directly down the gun shafts and exploded inside. Dozens of unfortunate slave laborers were killed, and the bunkers suffered extensive damage. Not realizing the damage they had inflicted, the Allies continued to bomb the bunker and develop new techniques in the hopes of destroying the V3 site. Okay, so we're about to talk about a little unknown part of history. So, you guys know who JFK is, right? John F. Kennedy. You also know that you also probably know he had a brother named Robert Kennedy. Did you know they had an older brother? There were 3 Kennedy brothers. Going from youngest to oldest, it was Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, and the oldest was Joseph Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was in the Navy. Joseph was in the Air Force. You're about to learn what happened to him. One such technique to remove the V3 was Project Aphrodite. In a daring maneuver, a two-man crew would fly a B-17 crammed full with 10 tons of explosives toward the target. When they neared the target, the crew would bail out, and a second B-17 would use a radio control stick and a crude TV system to guide the bomber into the bunker. This method was attempted several times and failed miserably, either missing the bunker entirely or inflicting no more damage than the tall boys. Joseph Kennedy Jr., the brother of the late President John F. Kennedy, was actually killed on one of these missions when he bailed out of his bomber. Project Aphrodite was abandoned in 1944. And that's not exactly what happened. So, as I read just there, all of the attempts were never successful. The attempt that took Joseph Kennedy's life was probably one of the worst attempts. Because according to records, like we have the documentation to prove it, the plane didn't crash or miss the bunker or anything. The bomber just exploded. All 10 tons of explosives just detonated at once. It could have been an electrical error. It could have been, we don't know. But it was sudden and devastating. The two escorting P-51s that were flying escort were knocked around like kites in a windy day and barely survived crashing. The second B-17 that was supposed to guide it in was also knocked around. Yeah, fuck this. Explodes. Yeah. Both Joseph Kennedy and his co-pilot were killed in the explosion. The Kennedy... I shouldn't make this joke, but I'm going to. Ha 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 ha! Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! Everything bad happens to the Kennedys. Everything. Think about it. Joseph Kennedy, blown up by a botched plan. John F. Kennedy, assassinated. Robert Kennedy, also assassinated. Yeah, nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys. Continuing, by the end of August, it was clear to the Germans that the V3 battery could not be made operational in time to fire in the face of the advancing Allied invasion force. It was abandoned by the Germans and captured by the British. On May 9th, 1945, the guns were dynamited and the bunkers rendered unusable by the British as a precaution to prevent the French from having a pre-made London gun. Portions of the Mimoyek V3 complex were open to the public as of 2006. Two additional scaled-down V3 guns were constructed in the hopes that they could be used during the Ardennes Offensive. That's the Battle of the Bulge, by the way. These guns were not ready in time to bulge any battles, but in January of 1945, they were used to bombard Antwerp and Luxembourg. Both guns exploded after firing only a few projectiles. Oops. All right, time for the hypotheticals. There we go. Hypothetical deployment history. Construction began simultaneously on 5 V3 bunkers at Mimoyek in July of 1943. Allied efforts to bomb the bunkers met with repeated failures and barely slowed the subterranean slave labor construction. In July of 1944, with the bunkers nearing operational readiness, a lucky bombing raid by the Allies knocked one of the batteries out of action. On July 27th, the other 4 batteries began operating. It quickly became apparent that the batteries could only operate for a very limited amount of time, as the Allies had a bad habit of sending planes to bomb the bunkers once the shells began to hit London. After several days of bombardment and hundreds of Londoners dead, the British began to send routine aerial patrols to the vicinity of the bunker. On August 2nd, during a brief daytime bombardment period, the Allies managed to knock out two more bunkers with lucky bomb strikes, though they lost 2 B-17s when they collided with shells from the V3 batteries. Allied plans called for the entire Calais region, including the V3 site, to be bypassed in favor of a rapid advance on Holland. However, constant shelling from the area and the increasingly apparent failures of Operation Market Garden led Allied planners to reconsider. In late August of 1944, Canadian, British, and Czech forces began a clearing of the Calais ports. The Germans abandoned the V3 bunkers in early September, leaving behind only a small garrison that surrendered after a short but bloody fight. The bunkers became a command post for the Canadians soon afterward. British and American intelligence experts visited the site, marveled at the size of the facilities, and joked about the pointlessness of the German endeavor. Winston Churchill even referred derisively to the artillery positions as Angry Mustache Man's broken ladders, after announcing that the guns had been silenced in a radio broadcast. Well, so that's that. But we're not done. Now we're going to talk about probably one of the weirdest things. You guys are going to, like, I swear, when I read this book, I didn't even know this was real. I knew about the V3. I didn't know about this. So, allow me now to introduce you to, well, I'm just going to be blunt about it. Allow me to introduce you to the grandfather of wire-guided missiles. This is the X7, aka Little Red Riding Hood. That's literally what it's called. Rotokopchen, which translates to Little Red Riding Hood. This is the X7 anti-tank missile. To quote a joke, tank missile. The world's most ubiquitous anti-tank weapon these days is the RPG-7, manufactured originally by the Soviets and now by several other nations. This weapon is a lineal descendant of Germany's World War II era Panzerfaust. What many may not know is that the advanced guided anti-tank missiles used by the United States in present conflicts are also very similar to the Germans' World War II creations. The X7 Rotkopchen, Little Red Riding Hood, was the world's first wire-guided anti-tank missile. After World War II, the Wolf learned not to mess with Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah. Developed beginning in 1943 by Max Kramer, the weapon was a greatly scaled-down version of Kramer's X4 wire-guided air-to-air missile. Capable of being carried and operated by a single man, the missile utilized principles such as wire-linked manual command line of sight that remained in use with modern anti-tank weapons. Kramer even experimented with various types of semi-autonomous infrared and optical guidance systems for the weapons. It's a two-stage wire-guided anti-tank rocket, and it has a 2.5 kilogram hollow charge warhead. Again, I speak in freedom units, so I do not know how much 2.5 kilograms is. Anyway, I love how it's not development history. It's literally called A Brief History of Blowing Up Tanks. The Germans were being fairly effective in fighting the British into a bloody stalemate during World War I. Then something that military historians refer to as the tank appeared on the battlefield, courtesy of the King's English. Mostly, the tanks just sat around broken down, but when they were working, the British gave the Germans quite a scare. The sight of these slow-moving early tanks crawling across the moonscape of a battlefield was probably much like the Anzacs catching their full faceful of conquistador musket. The Aztecs catching their first faceful of conquistador musket. Unlike the Aztecs, the Germans had more to fall back on than chucking a couple of sacrifices down the old Tenochtitlan prayer pit. They turned their ingenuity to constructing a means to overcome the armored hides of the British vehicles. Specialty bullets worked as a stopgap measure. But in 1918, Mauser began to mass-produce a 13.2 millimeter anti-tank rifle. It was bulky and fairly difficult to operate, but it worked. The real arms race between the tank and man-portable anti-tank weaponry had begun. Tanks on all sides operating during World War II were generally more heavily armored than the scant centimeter-thick hides of their World War I predecessors. All sides also fielded anti-tank rifles at the outbreak of hostilities, although they were only capable of penetrating the most lightly armored tanks. It was not until 1942 that the first really effective man-portable anti-tank solution appeared on the battlefield. The American bazooka was an electrically activated rocket grenade launcher. The bazooka was an effective weapon against the side and rear armor on nearly all German tanks, but it was by no means the best anti-tank weapon produced during the war. The British-developed Piat, projector, infantry, anti-tank, launched a heavier charge using what amounted to a big spring. Like Badger said, because a big spring and a shape charge works for me. Its chief advantages were that it could be fired from inside structures, and it did not produce any exhaust gas that could reveal the position of the gunner. The Piat was heavy, inaccurate, took a long time to reload, and shells sometimes failed to detonate. Though it is widely regarded as a fairly poor weapon, it was used to great effect by some particularly courageous British soldiers. The Germans developed two notable infantry anti-tank rocket launchers. Their own original design was a disposable and lightweight one-shot rocket launcher called Panzerfaust, or Tank Fist. The size of the launcher and its charge, known as Postpatron, escalated dramatically through the war. It was an effective weapon and easy to handle, though had very poor range. What made it remarkable was that it was simple and cheap to produce. Nearly every squad of infantry could be equipped with at least one Panzerfaust. The Panzerschreck, or Tank Terror, was a re-engineering of captured American bazookas. The Panzerschreck fired an 88mm rocket that was superior to the projectile launched from the bazooka. To quote the soldiers from Company of Heroes 2, "Put an 8cm rocket up their ass!" Yes, I know it's technically impossible to fire a Panzerschreck from an enclosed position. Don't read the fucking manual next time, and you won't care so much. Unfortunately, for the soldier firing the weapon, the rocket continued to expel superheated exhaust for the first few meters of flight. The Germans had not yet developed a human face capable of enduring the exhaust from their rocket without injury. In lieu of tougher faces, a fireproof shield with a mica viewport was added to the Panzerschreck. This addition placed the shield in the direct path of the exhaust and turned the recoilless weapon into a weapon with a tendency to recoil its shield directly into the face of the gunner. Despite this unpleasantness, the reusable Panzerschreck was extremely effective and was issued to specialist tank hunter detachments, presumably along with bandages for their repeatedly broken noses. Let's see. None of these man-portable weapons came close to matching the range of an anti-tank rifle, let alone anti-tank artillery. The limitations forced infantry to either wait for a tank to approach to within 100 to 150 meters or charge out and assault a tank. Even if they were hiding in ambush, infantry usually only had one shot at the enemy since, well, other than the Piat, the smoke and fire produced by the rocket gave away their position. Anti-tank rifles had the range to allow infantry to somewhat engage tanks, but they could not fire shells large enough to harm most tanks. A better solution was needed, and the Germans found it in a somewhat unlikely source. The history of the X-7 anti-tank rocket began with the development of its airborne predecessor, the X-4, the best of the Mega Man X games. Max Kramer of Ruhlstahl AG began work on the X-4 guided air-to-air missile in 1943 and received a development order in the summer of that year. The X-4 was roughly 2 meters in length and consisted of 4 swept-back stabilizer wings, 2 of which spooled out guidance wire from pods on the wingtips and 4 smaller tail stabilizers. The X-4 was nearly supersonic and featured a 20-kilogram warhead capable of reducing virtually any aircraft into a puff of debris. The flight of the X-4 was controlled from the cockpit or bombardier's position of the launching aircraft using 2 joysticks. Flares in the wingtips of the missile made it easier to visually track and guide. Tests conducted through 1944 demonstrated the X-4's excellent accuracy, and plans were made for the weapon to enter mass production. In 1945, thousands of production bodies for the X-4 had been completed, but the usual delays in engine production caused by Allied bombings precluded the completion and operational deployment of the missile. But long before the war had ended, the X-4 project came to an end, but Kramer had moved on to smaller and more terrestrial things. Demands for a more accurate and longer-range infantry anti-tank weapon inspired him to adapt his air-to-air missile for ground launching. This was made even faster by the fact that Kramer had already developed a version of the X-4 for the air-to-ground role. The X-7 project began in 1944, with the goal of producing a light anti-tank missile capable of being carried and operated by 1 or 2 men. The X-7 was functionally very similar to the X-4. It consisted of 2 rather than 4 stabilizer wings and had a boom-mounted tail elevator for flight path adjustments. And like the X-4, the X-7 would rotate while in flight to increase the stability of its trajectory. It was smaller, and it was less than half as long and much lighter in weight, partially due to a reduced fuel load. The first test of the X-7 was conducted only months after the project began. On September 21st, 1944, the first live firing of 7 missiles was conducted. A target tank was placed at range of 500 meters from the launch position. The first 4 missiles made contact with the ground during their flight and broke apart or exploded. The next 2 missiles experienced engine failure, the kind where the engine explodes. The 7th and final missile zipped from the rails and burned through its 2-stage rocket motor. A little over 5 seconds after it left the rails, it struck the tank and completely destroyed it. Incredibly, this inauspicious test run was sufficient for the needs of the German army. An order was issued for a trial production run, and a few hundred X-7 rockets were completed. Many were expended in further tests and training, but it is rumored that an unknown number were used on the Eastern Front in the closing days of the war. A large number of them were captured as the Allies advanced and captured Ruhstahl AG production facilities in New Brandenburg and Brackwid. And finally, the analysis and the hypothetical development, or the hypothetical deployment. The X-7 was a groundbreaking weapon system. Though it was not the first missile to incorporate wire guidance, it was the pioneer among ground-launched anti-tank missiles. The unfortunate debut of the X-7 cannot be ignored, but it also should not be overemphasized. No other German infantry anti-tank rocket could hit a tank at a range of 500 meters. Adequate training of X-7 operators would have reduced the failure rate caused by their unconventional steering methods, whether or not there were any refinements made in the design. Had the X-7 reached the front in large numbers, it might have equalized the battle between armor and infantry to some degree. It was not as flexible as simple weapon systems like the Panzerfaust, but its long-range theoretical accuracy and relatively heavy warhead would have made it a real threat. Now the deployment history. The first major allotment of production models of the X-7 reached tank hunter detachments with Army Group Center located along the Neisse River on April 14, 1945. Ferdinand Schorner's ravaged Army Group was facing off against the First Ukrainian Front and more than 2 million men under Marshal Konev. The Germans had dug in deep along the Neisse. It was one of the last barriers in the sector between Konev and a swing north to Berlin. Concrete bunkers, trenches, and other prepared positions seemed substantial, but were about to be crushed beneath unrelenting aerial and artillery bombardment. The tank hunter units were constantly in action, skirmishing with Soviet probes for an upcoming final offensive to complete the encirclement of Berlin. On the night of April 15th, by the spectral infrared light provided by an Uhu searchlight, see Chapter 5, a battery of 4 X-7 rockets ambushed a Guards tank company at a range of 340 meters. One rocket exploded only a few dozen meters from the launch trench, lightly wounding the crew. A second lost control and detonated on the ground, but the remaining 2 found their targets and completely killed 2 Soviet T-3485s. The celebrations were short-lived. The tank hunters fled from the charging tanks and let teams equipped with the Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust handle the remaining of the battle. The position on the eastern bank of the Neisse could not be held, and German forces retreated west as the Soviets began to take and establish crossing points. All of the X-7s available were pressed into action, with quite good results. One detachment, equipped with 5 X-7 launch systems and 7 of the missiles, managed to kill 6 enemy tanks that morning. Casualties among tank hunters, however, were terrible. as many were forced to engage tanks from shorter ranges and suffer the consequences of remaining stationary during the missile's flight. Schorner's men held the front with nothing but tenacity. Schorner refused to commit his tank reserves to the fight, and the Soviets poured through a gap. The beleaguered tank hunters on Schorner's southern flank had no shortage of targets. They fired X-7 rockets at the Soviet tanks from long range and then used Panzerschreck rockets as the enemy charged closer. The teams were wiped out, and only a few escaped from their trenches into the denuded forests or the city. The X-7 did its job. It held part of the line for one more day, but Schorner's sector was reeling under blows from Konev's forces, and soon the Silo Heights would be lost as well. So yeah. Now, unfortunately, we are at our time limit, I'm afraid. I went fast, didn't it? I am going to do more of this. Trust me, I want to finish this book. And I've had a lot of fun with it. And next time we do this, we'll talk about German night vision equipment. Because, yeah, the Germans had night vision equipment. They were the first to do it, actually. In fact, you know what? Before I go, I'll show you guys their night vision equipment. This is something straight out of sci-fi. You guys are going to love this. Check this out. Check it out. Yeah, that's early night vision equipment. You would have a battery pack on you and would give you night vision. And it was real. It existed. They used it. Not very well, but it was used. That's pretty cool, honestly, to see how far technology's come. But it doesn't matter how far technology's come, because anyone in the military will tell you night vision still fucking sucks. So, anyway, let me take us back to our normal area. Here we are. So, that's a far cry from the... yeah, a very far cry. But hey, every piece of technology's got to start somewhere, right? I mean, yeah, work smarter, not harder. Yeah, the Cloaker can thank the Germans for giving him such cool night vision stuff. Anyway, don't go anywhere. We are going to raid somebody. I think that's only fair.